Baseball has seen legends, but only one pitcher was so dominant that Major League Baseball changed its rules to stop him. In 1968, amid the most pitcher-friendly era in history, Bob Gibson posted a jaw-dropping 1.12 ERA, a number so unthinkable, hitters called it impossible. But how good was Bob Gibson goes deeper than stats. Here is a man who went from poverty in Omaha and childhood illness to striking fear in Hall of Famers and forever redefining what it meant to own the mound. How does someone become the Intimidator? And what kind of cost does that level of greatness demand? What happened in Gibson's life that shaped baseball itself? Bob Gibson's childhood was a test of survival before it was ever a contest of skill. Born in 1935 in Omaha, he arrived 3 months after his father died of tuberculosis. His mother, Victoria, worked long hours in the lace factory and cleaned houses to keep 7 children fed. The family's world shrank to the Logan Fontanelle projects, 4 cramped rooms, thin walls, and a city that drew hard lines between black and white. But even inside, safety was never guaranteed. Bob was a sickly kid. Rickets softened his bones, asthma rattled his lungs, and a heart murmur put sports beyond his doctor's imagination. At age 3, pneumonia nearly killed him. Wrapped in a quilt, he was carried to the hospital by his oldest brother, Josh, who would become his protector and mentor. As Josh hurried through the cold, Bob looked up and asked, "Am I going to die?" That question haunted the family, but Josh refused to let his little brother give in. He pushed Bob to fight, first for breath, then for every inch on a playground or a ball field. The projects were rough, but they made competition a way of life. Bob learned to run, jump, and throw not just to win, but to prove he belonged. Josh drilled him in discipline and toughness, turning every game into a lesson. For Bob, pain was a familiar opponent, beaten back one day at a time. By the time he could walk to the diamond on his own, he'd already learned that nothing would be handed to him. Not health, not respect, not a place in the lineup. That edge, forged in hospital wards and the shadows of Omaha's alleys, would become his armor. The fire started in those early years, and it never went out. Bob Gibson didn't walk onto a big league mound as a finished product. He arrived as a whirlwind, raw, wild, and already terrifying. In 1957, the Cardinals signed him out of Creighton, but his path to the majors was anything but straight. That winter, he joined the Harlem Globetrotters, running the court with Meadowlark Lemon, dazzling crowds with behind-the-back dunks and fast breaks. Basketball sharpened his legs, his lungs, and his edge, but baseball was where he'd leave his mark. By 1959, Gibson was in a Cardinals uniform, and from the first pitch, he made hitters uncomfortable. His fastball came in angry, high 90s with a tail that seemed to hunt for wrists. Early on, he struggled to find the strike zone, but that only added to his mystique. Batters didn't dig in against Gibson. They didn't dare. Hank Aaron once said he'd knock down his own grandmother if she crowded the plate. The league learned quickly. The inside corner belonged to Gibson, and he'd defend it with purpose. Teammates talked about the way he stalked the mound, eyes narrowed, shoulders squared, every pitch thrown like it was personal. Even in batting practice, nobody relaxed. Opponents felt the tension before the first pitch. He worked fast, didn't smile, and refused to show a hint of weakness. The intimidation wasn't just show, it was a weapon. By the early 60s, word had spread. Facing Bob Gibson meant entering a fight, and he was just getting started. October in St. Louis doesn't forgive mistakes, and it never forgot Bob Gibson. In 1964, the Cardinals needed a stopper. The Yankees were loaded with legends, Mantle, Maris, Elston Howard, and the series was tied. Game 5, Yankee Stadium, extra innings. Gibson pitched into the 10th, struck out 13, and refused to leave the mound until the Cardinals were up 3-2. 3 days later, he came back on 2 days' rest for Game 7. The Yankees clawed at him, but Gibson kept firing even as his arm faded. He gave up 2 late home runs, but with the tying run at the plate, he got Bobby Richardson to pop out. 7-5 Cardinals. Gibson had thrown 27 innings in the series, struck out 31, and outlasted the most decorated lineup of the era. 3 years later, the test was even steeper. July 15, 1967, Roberto Clemente cracked a line drive off Gibson's right leg. The bone fractured, but Gibson, convinced it was just a bruise, stayed in. He walked Stargell, got Mazeroski to fly out, then tried to finish Clendenin. The fibula finally snapped. He crumpled, the stadium silent. 8 weeks later, with his leg still aching, he was back. The World Series against Boston was a war of attrition. Lonborg, Yaz, Impossible Dream. Gibson started games 1, 4, and 7. Complete game wins each one. Game 4, 5-hit shutout. Game 7, 3 hits, 2 runs, 10 strikeouts. He even homered. Series MVP, 27 innings, 14 hits, 3 runs, 26 strikeouts, 1.00 ERA. Every October, the Cardinals handed him the ball and got out of the way. The bigger the moment, the more Gibson seemed to grow. He didn't just beat great teams, he broke their will. That's how legends are built. One battered leg, one short rest start, one season-saving strikeout at a time. Bob Gibson's dominance began before the ball ever left his hand. His windup was all coiled tension, shoulders turning, eyes narrowed, glove tucked tight. Then, in a blink, he exploded toward the plate. Every pitch came with the same violent, full-body commitment. Gibson's arm worked from a 3/4 slot, almost sidearm, but with enough elevation to hide the ball until the last instant. At release, his right leg kicked high and his whole frame tumbled toward first. So much force, he sometimes finished nearly off the mound. That movement wasn't just for show, it let him release the ball closer to the plate, stealing fractions of a second from hitters who already had little chance. His fastball was the foundation. It came in heavy, usually 92 to 95 miles per hour, but Gibson could dial it up or subtract just enough to keep batters guessing. He threw both a 4-seamer for pure speed and a 2-seamer with late tail, always working the inner half. He lived by one rule: the plate was his. If a hitter crowded, Gibson didn't hesitate. He'd drive them back, then paint the black with another heater. That set up his true weapon, the slider. Hard, sharp, and devastating at nearly 90 miles per hour, Gibson's slider broke late and hard. He could throw it for strikes in any count, or bury it out of the zone when he needed a swing and miss. Catcher Tim McCarver swore Gibson could hit a target no wider than 2 baseballs with his slider, even when everyone in the park knew it was coming. But Gibson wasn't just a pitcher, he was an athlete. 9 straight Gold Gloves tell that story. He fielded bunts like a shortstop, pounced on dribblers, and turned comebackers into double plays with a flick of his wrist. His basketball legs gave him quickness off the mound, and his arm strength made runners think twice about taking an extra base. He practiced defense as obsessively as his delivery, never letting a single detail slide. On days he wasn't pitching, he'd throw from third to first just to keep the arm sharp. In an era when most hurlers treated fielding as an afterthought, Gibson made it a weapon. Every pitch, every grounder, every glance over his shoulder, he controlled the game with his body as much as his mind. That's how he built the arsenal that left hitters shaking their heads and changed what teams expected from an ace. In 1968, Bob Gibson didn't just dominate hitters, he erased hope. He started 34 games and finished 28 of them. His earned run average was 1.12. That number sounds made up, but it's real. No one's come close since. Over 304.2 innings, he allowed only 38 earned runs. 13 times he walked off the mound without giving up a single run. During one stretch, he threw 47 consecutive scoreless innings. Hitters managed a .184 average against him. From June through August, he won 15 straight games and gave up just 6 runs in 15 complete games. The intimidation wasn't just in the numbers, it was in every pitch. Gibson struck out 268 batters that year, and in Game 1 of the World Series, he set a record, 17 strikeouts against Detroit. That's the most ever in a World Series game. By season's end, he owned both the Cy Young and the MVP, unanimously. The league had never seen anything like it, and it never would again. Baseball had never seen a pitcher bend the game to his will quite like Bob Gibson. In the wake of 1968, league officials made a move that spoke louder than any MVP trophy. That December, they voted to lower the mound from 15 inches to 10, a 5-inch drop aimed at restoring hope to hitters everywhere. The strike zone shrank too, squeezed from the shoulders down to the armpits. These weren't tweaks, they were a direct response to a season where offense nearly vanished and pitchers ruled unchecked. The results were immediate. Batting averages jumped across both leagues, and runs per game shot up by nearly 20% in 1969. Gibson's brand of dominance, the kind that made hitters question their own profession, became a relic overnight. Today, with pitch counts, bullpen specialists, and analytics policing workloads, nobody even approaches his 28 complete games or 300-plus innings. Sandy Koufax burned bright but briefly. Tom Seaver brought technical mastery. But Gibson? He was the force that made the sport rewrite its own rules, the last ace of an era that now lives only in the record books. In 1968, Bob Gibson posted a 1.12 earned run average, the lowest for a starting pitcher over a full season in modern Major League history. That single number forced baseball's decision makers to lower the mound and shrink the strike zone the very next year, a documented response to the era's dominance by pitchers like Gibson. Across a career spanning 251 wins, 3,117 strikeouts, and 9 gold gloves, he redefined what it meant to be an ace, especially in October, with 8 complete games in 9 World Series starts and a 1.89 earned run average. Yet, the full cost of Gibson's relentless drive, physically and personally, remains partly hidden, as do the details of his private life away from the mound. Today's game, with its pitch counts and bullpen specialists, cannot replicate the conditions that forged Gibson's legacy. What is clear from the historical record is this: Bob Gibson didn't just master his craft, he forced the sport itself to change.